So Lucretius, he's this Roman poet who writes about his passion. Philosophical view on of Epicureanism. He writes to a friend named Mimas, who's a Roman political figure. I believe that he wants to take this Greek idea, he takes it and he writes it into a poem in Latin, so that it is something that someone like his friend here would be able to read and want to read it because it looks like something professional. And so he wants to encourage his friend. I think this is my personal belief. I believe that he writes this to encourage his friend that he needs to know that he needs to live his life to the fullest because there is nothing after this life. And so he breaks down the idea of what the basic building blocks of matter is, and then how the body and the soul and the mind are still all physical things. And I think he does it because, look, in the position that his friend is in, it's easy to want to be power hungry, to want to get to the top, and I think that's why he concludes book 3 the way he does, and talking about reaching for those goals and doing these things and how we run that race trying to get there. But truthfully, it has no value to it. We find ourselves, after we get to the top, we're still hungry. We drink and we're still thirsty, and we do all these things, and we're not we lose our passion as we finally obtain those things, and it's not enough to suffice us. And he's like, look, this is all you got. This is your life. This is the only part. So you shouldn't be worried about what the gods and goddesses are going to do to you. You shouldn't worry about punishment. You shouldn't worry about justice and getting to the top. You simply should worry about doing and learning and growing in this life that you have to live, because that's the only time that you have. And so he goes on to explain that all matter is made up of these particles and then void space. The particles are infinite across an infinite universe, and that matter can never be completely destroyed. It can be created, and as it builds up, it can deteriorate over time and break down to its simplest form, but it never leaves once it gets to that simplest form. He talks about the soul, the fact that all matter is made up of, or all things are made up of matter, and he goes on to explain the different shapes and sizes, the weight, the density of it, and all these things to try to explain, gets all to the very, very point of the fact that the gods didn't create us. There's no way matter could come from nothing, that it had to come from something. And so he brings it out that it was these particles that are going through space, that are moving up and down, that have the ability to make their own decisions and move out of the way, if you will. But the fact that they grab each other as they're going through, kind of like hooks into a fish into a tackle box. They pick up, and you got this big cluster of things, and it creates this piece of matter. And he goes on to say that, hey, that's what happens to the body. And we know that the body is animate, and it moves. And because it moves, there must be another part of it. So he talks about the mind and the soul, and how those are also matter that's created. And it's also matter that can be dissolved and go back to its simplest form. While he also does that within an idea of a certain nature of things, that certain particles are going to connect to certain particles, and it's going to continue a cycle. And he tries to show that out of this chaos that there is some order, yet there's nothing that controls this order other than the shape and the sizes of these particles. I would agree. I mean, it's pretty amazing to me that a guy 100 years before Christ, or 50 years before Christ, can actually talk about atomic particles. The fact that he knows that there's something beyond. I think it's insane that he believes that there can be order and chaos without divine authority. I know that he is looking at gods and goddesses, and I look at the religion, I think, yeah, I can see how you can see all that's crazy. But I think it being explained the fact that God created the world, he spoke it to existence, and there has to be some kind of order that creates all this. And then you go to those atomic particles. Where did they come from? If matter comes from something, and these somethings can never be destroyed, they had to start somewhere. And that has to be from some kind of divine creator that we know to be God, that he spoke this world into existence. I think as we read this and we find out what he's really trying to say and all the things that he's talking about, I think that he ultimately wants his friend to grasp life in its fullness. But the one thing he did, he argued against the gods and the goddess, and I think he made a great point for the fact that God really exists, because he says, hey, there's this huge chaos out here, and in this chaos, all of a sudden these things start happening. Well, how do they happen? Well, he says it's the shape and it's the form and it's the sizes and all these things. Well, that's great, but it doesn't explain why they do it. It doesn't explain that a baby's born and we don't have just adult men just all of a sudden being formed out of the air, or rhinoceroses just to form out of the air. We say, well, it's the nature of things. Well, nature doesn't explain chaos. It's not order. And so I'd like to ask two questions. So the first question being this: do you think that if Lucretius had been pushed a little bit, could he use nature to define order? The second question I have is, because he talks about there not being life after this one, how do you think Lucretius would deal with the loss of a child, his own child, or his own mother or father? Just a thought.